your names and what section of the YMC this is, and what's the session about?
Sure. I'm Mark Riel,
I'm Logan Obe.
and this is week 8 at the YMC. This week we discussed building our WordPress themes into a dynamic platform that people could use and add content through the administration panel so that it would appear online and what they would be required to do in order to make that happen.
I talked about cloud hosting. Cloud hosting is when you use the power of multiple computers to build sort of a virtual computer which you'll use to host your application online.
So we started off last week with some basic HTML templates, and then we dove in to make a WordPress theme out of them, right? So we ended up inside our text editor. We were starting to play around with some of the aspects, and I believe where we left off was when we brought in our style sheet. So we took a look at some basic PHP last week, and we left off kind of importing our style sheet into our theme folder. And just as a quick refresher, just in case anybody needs it, what we want to remember is that depending on whether you decided to use the Microsoft Web Platform Installer or XAMPP, most of our stuff is either, if you're using Microsoft, you'll be in that www root folder, and if you're using XAMPP, your stuff will be in htdocs. So if you remember last week when we created that themes folder, it gave us this option to select our theme, right? So once we had created this YMC theme, it popped up in our themes folder and we were able to select it. So that's where we're kind of at right now. But the difficulty that we have is if we scroll down here, we'll notice that most of our stuff is still all in HTML, right? Particularly the video content, which at this point in time still kind of defeats the purpose of why we're using WordPress in the first place, because we have all this HTML stuff in here. Nothing in this is really dynamic. So the first thing that we want to touch upon today is, first of all, what happens to our content when we put it into WordPress? Like, where does it go? And how do we go about accessing that content once it's there? So the question is on the front end of things, how do we then go about accessing all this database information? What is it that we have to do? We know that we want to be able to enter content in here and not have to worry about it later on. But right now, what we still have is that in order to get these videos and stuff to appear on our page, we have to go back into our theme file and actually, paste the HTML stuff in there. So let's see if we can solve that dilemma right now. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go into our posts, and I'm going to add a new one. And I'm going to call this one, our latest video up was YMC Day 3, and we talked about design. So that's going to be the title of our post, and I'm just going to jump into YouTube just so everybody's familiar with where we're getting all this stuff from. So YouTube, when you want to embed a YouTube video, you can just kind of hit this embed button underneath the video. When we click that embed button, this is the code that YouTube will spit out to make it available for you to share on your own site or embed into your own projects. So this whole chunk of code is code provided to us by YouTube. And what we want to do now, though, is instead of having this HTML directly in our templates, we're going to cut that stuff out, and we're going to put it into our WordPress admin panel instead. So the question now is, how do we get that to be dynamic content? Because obviously we don't want to have to go into our HTML or PHP files every time we want to add in a new piece of content. So it's there in our database. We've got a title, we've got the video. How do we display it online? So what needs to happen here is we need to write some PHP, or more simply put, we need to write some WordPress that will, since WordPress is all done in PHP, that's going to go to our database, grab that piece of content from the database and display it where we want to display it. And what you get led to is this one kind of pivotal WordPress concept called the loop. And we're going to start talking about that a little bit. And what this loop basically does is it sends a query to the database, and it grabs a certain number of posts from the database depending on what stuff it is that you're querying. And it brings information back that you can then go and edit and do what you will with it. And we'll kind of go through it step by step, what we need to have done. What we start off with is a while statement. And we've got those two clauses in there, while have posts. And then we've got the colon, and we've got the post. What these things are is they're a very simplified way that WordPress, the kind of simplified tools that WordPress gives you to access that database content. Right, so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the back end. If we remember last week when we took a look at when we mentioned the files that we don't want to really be touching in WordPress, all the stuff that handles all the nuts and bolts of it. From our end, from a developer standpoint, these are just kind of like really handy and simplified tools that we can use to access all that content there. So in this circumstance, what's actually happening is that that have post part, it's saying like while there's any WordPress post in the database right now, like as long as there's WordPress posts, it's going to iterate through them. And this second part where it says the post, that kind of loads in all the information for each individual post, right? So there's kind of two instructions that are going on here. So let's say, for instance, we want to get the title of the post that we just made. If we go back into Expression Web and we'll put our title inside some h1 tags, all I'm going to say is the_title. Let's try to get the actual content of those posts. Right, there's another kind of WordPress tag that we can put in there to get the content. So I'm going to save that. So now not only are we getting the title, but we're also getting the content for the post as well. And when we're done getting all the stuff that we need to give an end while command. What's happening now is that all the content that we're editing in the WordPress admin panel is all appearing online, right? That static area that we had there is not static anymore. It's receiving all the content that we wanted to receive, which is pretty cool. What else is common from page to page on a website in terms of actual content? Navigation, sidebar, footer, exactly. And fortunately for us, once we start building stuff in PHP, we have a mechanism that we don't have to put the footer in on every single one of our pages, right? So basically what I mean by that is, again, going back to the YMC site, there's a pretty good chance that on every single page, the header part's going to remain fairly static, right? We're not going to have like a different logo on one of our pages all of a sudden. The footer area, any of that copyright legal information is probably going to stay the same on all the pages. And the sidebar, for the most part, is also going to stay the same on all the pages. And all we're really going to be changing is this dynamic content in here, right? That's the stuff that would be changing. So we have the ability to separate those common areas of content, right? And then include them back in together. WordPress gives us three mechanisms with which to do that. There's a get_header. There's a get footer. And conveniently enough, there's a get sidebar. All right, so that's an aspect of PHP. Like if you ever had other files that you wanted to include, there is other PHP related ways that you could do that. But WordPress, those three mechanisms in particular are really easy to get up and running with. Right, so that's one extra optimization that we'd probably want to do to our theme. Since we are going to have multiple templates, we'd want to extract those common areas through the same logic that we use when we put the CSS and JavaScript stuff together.
Okay, cloud hosting. We're going to start off with a little demonstration to kind of explain it a little better, give like a real-life scenario. So say you've got like a wrestling fan site, because you really like wrestling, and it's a WordPress site. You've got like this normal non-cloud server here. So that's your server. You have your like WordPress wrestling site in there. And one day you're making breakfast and you have your toast and there's a picture of Hulk Hogan's face burned into your toast. And now like that's a big story. Everyone's coming to your site. You have way too much traffic. The server can't hold it anymore. So normally what you'd have to do with a normal physical server like this is you'd either have to upgrade it, which means you've got to take pieces out and then put new ones in. And the whole time like this has to turn off because you can't be like switching out parts on a live machine. So you have downtime, you have the time it takes to replace everything. that costs a lot more to put in all the hardware. You can also instead start buying more servers. So now these guys are all there, which also costs a lot more money because now you're paying for 3 servers instead of just the 1. So this was how we used to always have to do things, but cloud hosting makes it a lot easier. Because what cloud hosting is basically somewhere there's a ton of these servers already here, but way more than this, there's like a ton. And they're all working together like this, and they kind of share all their memory and resources to make just this big cloud of processing power and storage. And so what happens with this compared to these is, with this you're limited to the memory and the power of this one machine. But over here what you can do is you can create a virtual server inside of this, and it's just completely elastic. You can easily upgrade it just as soon as you want. You can make multiple copies of the same server. You can do this whenever you want. You can turn it on, turn it off. And that's the main advantage of this. So there's a lot of different reasons. Well, first, you don't have the downtime anymore because you've got all these servers on, and they're basically there as soon as you need them. So from that, this can save you money as well, because here you have these servers, they're not going away, you paid for them, or if they're in a data center somewhere, you're paying for them for a whole month. Whereas with these cloud instances, you're paying when they're on. So if you don't need it anymore, you turn it off, or you limit the memory to it, and then suddenly, because it's not using as much power, you're saving money. And so that's another one of the big advantages of cloud hosting over traditional hosting.
So session 8, we dove into turning our static web content into dynamic content. So being able to take our old HTML, CSS templates and apply some PHP powered by WordPress to them and turn them into something dynamic that we can manage and maintain from an administration panel. And then we dove into some of the cloud server solutions as opposed to standard web hosting that you might be able to get and has commonly been used over the past years and definitely trending towards clouds becoming more prominent. And we closed off with a look at creating video for web. The big finale will tie up all the loose ends. We should be launching a site next week. We'll be taking a quick look at WordPress plugins just so that everybody's aware of the functionality of those. And then Al Karim will be coming in to talk about a lot of the post-launch considerations, such as analytics for your website, search engine optimizing, the things you need to keep in mind for those items there, and moving forward, marketing and monetizing your web platforms. There's no sure bet to monetizing, but there's definitely things you need to keep in mind and strategies that you would need to implement.